Imagine a car so beautiful, so bold, so unlike anything else on American roads that it instantly became one of the most desired vehicles of its era. A car that sold in huge numbers, turned heads everywhere it went, and carried a name that would go on to become one of the most legendary badges in automotive history. Now imagine that same company, at the absolute height of that car's success, walked into a room, looked at the blueprints, and decided to kill it. Not update it, not improve it, kill it completely. Wipe the chassis, the body, the platform, everything, and start over from scratch just 12 months later. That is exactly what happened to the 1958 Chevrolet Impala, and by the time you finish this video, you are going to understand just how strange, calculated, and almost ruthless this decision really was. Because this was not a failure being cut loose. This was success being executed on purpose, and the reason why is far stranger than you think. Let's rewind to 1958. America was living through the golden years of automotive design. Cars were not just transportation. They were rolling symbols of ambition, wealth, and the space-age optimism sweeping the entire country. Chrome was everywhere. Fins were getting taller. Engines were getting louder. And General Motors, the biggest car company on the planet, was right in the middle of a quiet but massive internal shift. The man who had defined an entire generation of American car design, Harley Earl, was preparing to retire. His replacement, a sharp, forward-thinking designer named Bill Mitchell, was already waiting in the wings with a completely different vision for what cars should look like. Curved, chubby, chrome-heavy shapes were about to be replaced by something leaner, sharper, and far more aggressive. And caught right in the middle of this transition, born into a single narrow window of time between one design era ending and another beginning, was the Chevrolet Impala. The man actually responsible for shaping this car day to day was Claire McEachin, the head of Chevrolet styling since 1953. McEachin was no stranger to success. He had already led the design of the legendary Tri-5 Chevrolets, the 1955, 1956, and 1957 models that are still worshipped by collectors today. So when McEachin and his team sat down to build something new for 1958, expectations were sky high. And what they came up with was not just another yearly refresh. It was something completely different underneath the skin. While the 1957 Chevrolets rode on a traditional perimeter frame, the same basic setup used for years, the new car for 1958 was given something brand new. An entirely fresh platform known internally as the X-frame chassis. This was not a minor tweak. This was a full engineering reset designed to lower the car's stance, improve ride quality, and give designers the freedom to create a longer, lower, more dramatic-looking body than anything Chevrolet had built before. And it was on this brand new platform that the name Impala was born. But here's where the story takes its first strange turn, because that name almost never happened. When the idea of calling this new premium Chevrolet the Impala was first pitched inside General Motors, it was not met with excitement. It was met with mockery. According to Claire McEachin himself, one senior executive scoffed at the idea, snapping back with something along the lines of, "Why on earth would we name a car after some kind of goat?" Think about that for a second. The name that would go on to become one of the most iconic, most recognized, most enduring model names in automotive history, a name that would still be rolling off production lines more than 60 years later, was almost thrown in the trash because a room full of executives did not even know what an Impala was. For those unfamiliar, an Impala is not a goat at all. It is a fast, graceful African antelope, known for explosive speed and incredible agility, capable of leaping distances that seem almost impossible for an animal its size. And that is exactly the image Chevrolet's design team wanted people to feel the moment they looked at this car. Elegant, swift, a step above anything ordinary. Despite the ridicule, the name survived, and it did a lot more than survive. It defied every doubter in that boardroom and became a legend. But the name was honestly the least strange part of this car's story. Because once you start looking closer at the details Chevrolet packed into this one-year-only Impala, you start to realize this was not just a car. It was practically a laboratory of bold, sometimes questionable, sometimes brilliant experiments, all crammed into a single 12-month production run. Take a look at the rear of the car and you will immediately notice something Chevrolet had never done before. Triple round taillights on each side, 6 in total, glowing like a signature the moment you saw them coming down the road. This was not just a stylistic flourish thrown on for fun. It was a calculated business decision. Chevrolet needed a way to visually separate their new premium Impala from the more basic models sitting underneath it in the lineup, cars like the Bel Air and the Biscayne. Those triple lights became an instant symbol of status, a way for anyone on the street to glance at the back of a Chevrolet and instantly know, without reading a single badge, that this was the top-of-the-line model. And here is the part that is almost unbelievable. That tiny design decision, 3 round lights per side, ended up outliving the very car it was created for by decades. It carried forward through the 1960s and 1970s, showed up on later models like the Caprice, and remarkably, you could still find a version of that triple light signature on the Chevrolet Lumina as late as the early 1990s. A small design choice made under pressure in 1958 quietly became one of the most recognizable design signatures in Chevrolet's entire history. Now here is where things get a little weirder. Look up at the roof of the 1958 Impala and you will spot a strange V-shaped vent sitting right at the rear center. At first glance, it looks purposeful, almost aerodynamic, like something engineered to cut through the air and pull hot cabin air out while the car is moving. And that is exactly what it was supposed to do. Chevrolet's engineers designed it as a working air extractor, a way to improve ventilation and keep passengers cooler on long summer drives. Ambitious idea, except it completely backfired. During real-world testing, engineers discovered the vent had been placed directly inside a low-pressure zone on the roof. Instead of pulling hot air out of the cabin like it was designed to do, it was actually doing the exact opposite, pulling outside air in. The engineering had failed. But rather than scrap the design entirely and admit defeat, GM did something almost sneaky. They kept the vent exactly where it was, for looks, and simply sealed it shut completely. What started as a genuine piece of functional engineering became, quietly, a purely decorative feature. A fake vent. A completely non-functional design element dressed up to look like cutting-edge aerodynamic technology. And get this, GM liked the look so much that they kept doing it. A few years later, cars like the 1963 to 1965 Buick Riviera and even the legendary 1963 Corvette Stingray featured similar fake air extractors. A failed piece of engineering on the Impala quietly became a recurring design trend across some of the most desirable cars GM ever built. If you think that is strange, wait until you sit inside. Grab the steering wheel of a 1958 Impala and you will immediately notice something unusual. It is a two-spoke wheel, punched full of large round holes, almost looking like a slice of Swiss cheese. This was not some random styling gimmick either. It was a direct nod to real racing culture at the time. Race car drivers in that era would often drill holes into their steering wheels themselves, reducing weight and improving grip and feedback. The Impala was absolutely not a race car. It was a stylish, upscale, comfortable American cruiser. But Chevrolet's design team wanted buyers to feel a sense of performance and sportiness the moment they sat behind the wheel, even if the car itself was built more for boulevard cruising than actual racing. It is a perfect little snapshot of a broader trend happening across the entire American car industry at the time. Everyday drivers were starting to crave a little bit of racing excitement in their daily rides, and Chevrolet was more than happy to give it to them, even if it was mostly for show. And speaking of performance, this is where the Impala genuinely backed up its bold looks with real muscle. Sitting at the very top of the engine lineup was the mighty 348 cubic inch V8, equipped with what Chevrolet called the Super Turbo Thrust setup, a tri-power configuration running 3 separate 2-barrel carburetors. This engine was capable of producing up to 280 horsepower, an absolutely serious number for a mainstream American car in 1958. If that felt like overkill, buyers could step down slightly to the more common turbo thrust version, running a single 4-barrel carburetor, and still putting out a very respectable 250 horsepower. And for the true tech enthusiasts of the era, Chevrolet even offered something wildly advanced for its time, a 283 cubic inch V8, equipped with ramjet fuel injection, also producing around 250 horsepower. Fuel injection in 1958. That is genuinely rare and impressive technology for the era, years ahead of when fuel injection would become common on mainstream American cars. And for buyers who cared more about economy and reliability than outright power, Chevrolet still offered a range of more modest 2- and 4-barrel V8s, along with the dependable inline 6-cylinder 235 cubic inch Blue Flame engine. This widespread of powertrain options meant the Impala was not just chasing one type of buyer. It was appealing to performance-hungry enthusiasts and practical-minded cruisers at the exact same time, all wrapped inside the same elegant body. But now we arrive at what might be the strangest, boldest, and ultimately most doomed experiment Chevrolet packed into this car. Buried deep in the option list was something that genuinely sounds like it belongs in a car from decades later, a full 4-wheel air ride suspension system. Instead of using traditional steel coil springs, this system relied on an engine-driven compressor that inflated a set of rubber airbags at each corner of the car. On paper, this technology promised something incredible, an ultra-smooth cloud-like ride quality, combined with automatic self-leveling that would adjust based on how much weight the car was carrying. It sounds futuristic because honestly, it kinda was. GM was experimenting with air suspension technology in 1958 that would not become common in mainstream vehicles until decades later. But here is the turning point. Because in the real world, away from the engineering labs, this system fell apart almost immediately. The early air ride units were plagued with constant leaks. The pressure valves were wildly unreliable. And the compressor itself was stealing a noticeable chunk of engine power just to keep everything inflated. Owners started reporting sagging suspensions, uneven ride heights, and in plenty of cases, complete total failure within just a few months of ownership. This was not a small embarrassing footnote either. It became a genuine crisis for General Motors. They were forced to recall every single Impala equipped with the air ride system, physically rip out the failed components, replace them with conventional suspension setups, and refund customers for a feature that simply did not work as promised. Because of that recall, very few Impalas on the road today still have their original factory air ride suspension intact, which ironically makes the surviving examples an extremely rare and valuable find for serious collectors hunting for the strangest, most authentic version of this car. Now, if you are sitting there thinking this car sounds like an absolute mess of failed experiments, hold on, because that is honestly the wrong takeaway. What all of this really shows is a car company that was not afraid to take massive risks. Some of those risks failed spectacularly, like the air suspension and the roof vent, but others became legendary design signatures that lasted for decades, like the triple taillights. This was a car built during a brief, narrow window where GM was willing to throw ambitious, sometimes half-baked ideas at the wall just to see what would stick. And that brings us to the real question hanging over this entire story. If this car was this bold, this successful, and this loved, why on earth did Chevrolet kill it after just one single year? The answer comes down to timing, strategy, and something most casual car fans never fully realize about how General Motors actually operated during this era. The 1958 Impala was never meant to be a long-term platform. It was essentially a bridge car, a rolling snapshot of a design language that was already being phased out the moment it hit showroom floors. Remember Harley Earl, the man who had defined GM's curvy, chrome-heavy, aircraft-inspired styling for decades, was on his way out. Bill Mitchell, his successor, was already pushing hard for a completely different design philosophy, one built around sharper lines, lower roof lines, and a far more aggressive modern silhouette. The 1958 Impala landed right in the crossfire of that transition. It represented the final full expression of Harley Earl's design era. Chubby curves, heavy chrome, that classic late 1950s optimism baked into every single body panel. But behind the scenes, the next generation car was already being engineered, and it was going to look almost nothing like it. By 1959, just 1 year later, Chevrolet completely reworked the Impala from the ground up. Both cars technically rode on the same basic X-frame chassis, but that is honestly where the similarities end. For 1959, Chevrolet stretched the wheelbase, widened the entire body, and dramatically lowered the roofline. The result was a car that looked longer, lower, and far sleeker than its curvier, chunkier predecessor. The seating position changed dramatically too. Because the roof had been pushed down so aggressively, seats in the 1959 model were mounted almost directly on the floor, creating a completely different driving posture. Legs stretched out ahead of you instead of the more upright seating of the original. Even the signature triple taillights, the very feature that had defined the entire premium Impala identity just 1 year earlier, were replaced. Chevrolet swapped them out for dramatic wing-shaped tail fins, chasing the bold new jet age aesthetic that Bill Mitchell was pushing GM toward. This was not a facelift. This was, in almost every meaningful sense, a brand new car wearing the same name badge. And that is really the heart of why the original 1958 Impala had to die after just one single year. It was never designed to be a long-running platform. It was a transitional car, built during a razor-thin window between two completely different design philosophies at General Motors. It carried the final echoes of Harley Earl's era, while simultaneously opening the door for Bill Mitchell's bold new future. GM simply was not interested in freezing that transitional moment in time and building it for multiple years. The entire American auto industry during this period was obsessed with newness, with reinvention, with giving customers a reason to walk back into the showroom every single year and feel like they were looking at the future. A car that stayed the same for 3 or 4 years in a row risked feeling stale, outdated, boring, in an industry where boring was basically a death sentence for sales. Chevrolet had already proven with the 1958 Impala that bold experimentation, even when some of those experiments failed spectacularly like the air ride suspension or the fake roof vent, could still generate massive excitement and strong sales. So naturally, the next logical move was not to sit still and protect what worked. It was to push even further, take the lessons learned, and build something even more dramatic for 1959. The 1958 Impala was not killed because it failed. It was killed because it succeeded exactly long enough to prove that GM could take an even bigger swing the very next year, and they were not willing to wait. There is also a deeper engineering story tied into all of this. That new X-frame chassis introduced with the 1958 Impala was part of a much larger shift happening across General Motors at the time, an early push toward more advanced unified vehicle platforms. Claire McEachin himself would later go on to contribute to GM's ambitious TASC program, short for Total Automotive System Concept, an initiative aimed at creating entirely new front-wheel drive platforms with a much higher degree of shared parts across different GM brands. That program would eventually evolve, years later, into the well-known X-Car platform, the underlying architecture behind vehicles like the Chevrolet Citation, Pontiac Phoenix, and Buick Skylark. In other words, the 1958 Impala was not just a beautiful, quirky, one-year wonder sitting off in isolation. It was a genuine stepping stone inside a much larger, ongoing engineering evolution happening across the entire company. GM was constantly experimenting, constantly rebuilding, constantly discarding what came before in pursuit of whatever the next big idea was. And in that relentless cycle of reinvention, a car simply did not get the luxury of sticking around if the company already had bigger, bolder plans waiting in the wings for the very next model year. When you step back and look at everything together, the completely new one-year-only chassis, the accidentally comedic origin story behind the Impala name itself, the triple taillights that would go on to define Chevrolet styling for decades, the fake but beautifully executed roof vent, the racing-inspired perforated steering wheel, the wildly powerful range of engines, topped by that tri-power 348 V8, and the ambitious but ultimately doomed air ride suspension system, you start to realize this was never just another yearly Chevrolet refresh. This was a genuine turning point car, caught in the middle of one of the most dramatic design transitions in General Motors history, built during a fleeting 12-month window that would never, ever be repeated. And that, more than anything else, is exactly why it remains one of the most fascinating, most collectible, and most quietly misunderstood cars Chevrolet ever produced. It did not fail. It was not replaced because buyers stopped wanting it. It was deliberately, strategically retired at the absolute peak of its success, sacrificed on purpose to make room for the next chapter of Chevrolet's design story. In a strange way, that short lifespan is exactly what makes the 1958 Impala so special today. It stands completely alone, no direct predecessor leading into it, and no real carryover leading out of it. Just one single, brilliant, occasionally flawed, endlessly fascinating year, frozen in time forever. So the next time you see a 1958 Chevrolet Impala sitting at a classic car show, take a real close look at it. Look at those triple taillights that would go on to define decades of Chevrolet design. Look at that strange sealed roof vent that was never actually supposed to be fake. Picture that Swiss cheese steering wheel spinning in the driver's hands. And imagine what it must have felt like driving one of these cars in 1958, completely unaware that the very platform underneath you was already living on borrowed time. Because Chevrolet was not building this car to last for years. They were building it to make a statement, prove a point, take a massive risk, and then move on to something even bolder the very next season. And honestly, that is exactly what makes it legendary. If you have ever seen one of these one-year-only Impalas in person, or if your family has a story connected to one, drop it in the comments below. We would genuinely love to hear it. And if this video just handed you a piece of automotive history you never knew before today, do not scroll past without hitting that like button, sharing it with a friend who loves classic cars, and subscribing to the channel for more hidden legends buried deep inside the golden age of American automobiles.